Can you all see my screen okay? Excellent. So this morning's workshop is about agreeing standards and boundaries with your team. This really is a key component to high performance in terms of leadership and leading effective teams. And it's something that I learned the hard way. So I'll talk a little bit about that this morning. These sessions and today's session is an opportunity just to press the pause button on all the activity that goes on in your business and in your work life. Very often from the kind of minute we start on a Monday to the minute we finish on a Friday, it's full on constant activity and noise. The idea of these sessions is to give you some thinking space. There's a lot of evidence that shows in businesses, certainly in current times, since the inception of email, since the inception of social media, people are struggling with thinking time. And it's that thinking time that helps us make the distinctions and make the changes and start to evolve the business and the strategy that we're working on. So today, hopefully gives you an hour, a slice of your Friday to start to think more strategically. So we'll talk about standards and boundaries. We'll talk about why that's important. And then I want to introduce you to this concept that you may or may not have heard of called contracting. And we'll talk a little bit about team contracting as well. That may link to another session that we'll run as well, specifically on team contracting. And this is a really important principle that isn't often taught to business leaders. It's something that I learned it probably a bit later in my career when I would have really got value from it earlier in my career. But sometimes hindsight is a wonderful thing. You don't get there until you know what you know. Very often we don't know what we don't know. And I just want to share a couple of bits of information which are really useful. Management research study by this company, Digits, and they found that 61% of managers receive no training after promotion. I was one of those managers when I first started in a management role, and 65% receive no ongoing management training. So even if you are trained, very often, in order to get the implementation, you need the ongoing management training. A 2-day course isn't going to cut it. You need that ongoing support. And I'll tell you about a client I had about 18 months ago. We still work together, not as often because she's now got her business under control. But she was the managing director of a medical company. And she found me through LinkedIn and social media. And we had a number of people that we were in common. And she approached me and said, would you do some one-to-one coaching with me? And I kind of the way I normally work is just kind of have an introductory call and just check that there's compatibility. I'm the right person. I can help her. And she explained to me what had happened. And as she was explaining it, it was really interesting because she kind of reminded me of my own career. So she was a kind of a scientific technician in a lab and did really well as a scientific technician in a lab and was good at communicating and really, really excelled in her role. And the head of the lab said, look, I'm moving on. I'd like to promote you. And so she got this job as head of lab. And she only did that for about 6 months. And then she was asked by the business if she would take a leadership role into sales. So would you become the sales manager? So then she kind of thought, brilliant, great opportunity, went across to become a sales manager. And that's where the trouble started. So she had quite a demanding, high-performing sales team that were challenging her, pushing back on all the ideas, not really following through on anything. And she did that for a couple of years. And then when I met her, she was actually MD of this company. And she said, spent the last 3 years feeling like I'm battling with everyone in the business. Like every day is a battle. She said, I just don't know how else to manage it. So she and I talked about a process of coaching. We went through a process of coaching. And the first thing we did together was work through this principle of contracting. And she was in a position where it was highly stressful and she'd had no leadership development, no management training. And I'll tell you a bit more about it later. But what we did was work through some of the principles from today, and they kind of unlocked a lot of opportunity for her. So I very often ask some of the common leadership challenges, and these are the things that come up. So the lady that I was working with, these were some of the things she was seeing, but these are some of the things that I've experienced in many leadership roles, and that is people who have negative attitudes, and they'll justify those negative attitudes with, well, someone needs to be pragmatic and realistic, right? So when someone's negative, they'll very often justify the negativity. gossiping and chatter, just talking about people in the business, and I guess in a way expending energy that could be used to drive the business and grow the business in idle gossip and chatter. It's surprising how common that is. Missing deadlines, and very often deadlines that are missed when you're in leadership. If those of you in leadership, you'll know this. If someone's missing a deadline, it doesn't just impact them; it impacts you as a leader, because very often you're the one that's trying to, either move things forward or you're ultimately accountable for the different things in the business being completed. Not accepting responsibility when that happens, so kind of saying, well, I couldn't have done it. It is what it is. Resisting any change, and this was something that multiple clients, but in particular this client, was trying to make some quite positive changes in the business, and a lot of those changes were about responsibility, making sure that tasks were completed on time, making sure that the team actually understood how to collaborate and work together. But some of those changes were being resisted, and of course, linking to the negative attitudes, people focusing on problems and not looking for opportunities. It's quite common that people will focus on problems. And then, of course, that leads to defensive behavior. So you end up in this almost like a negative loop, whereas you're trying to make changes, you end up with this problem-focused defensive behavior across the team. And, actually very often in leadership, we have to think about what we're tolerating. So especially if you're moving into new leadership positions, and sometimes you I've done this a number of times where I've been asked to go into a business to lead a business team, and I spent a lot of time in large corporations, and very often they call it an assignment. So you go into a business where perhaps the manager had moved on or retired, and there was a dysfunctional team in the business, and I was invited to would you like to take this over and see what you can do with it? And you really do have to examine what you tolerate. When you go into those situations where there's an existing culture, it's really easy to just allow the culture to continue. And sometimes you have to examine what you put up with as a leader and what you allow, because if you allow certain behaviors, even the smallest, inappropriate behaviors, if you don't tackle them, it continues. And very often that's down to our own self-worth and thinking about what we believe we are worthy of in any situation. So the way I learned to tackle this, and I have this model that I use called the coach model. And you would think that coaching as an intervention is perhaps coaching conversations. It absolutely is, and they are important. But there is a more important structure around how we approach leadership, and I believe coaching is a linchpin in leadership. It's not everything, but it is a linchpin. What is more important is the broader way in which we think about leadership, and I'll talk you through this model. If you've seen this before, hopefully it's a useful reminder. If it's the first time, hopefully it's useful as you start to put this into context with your business. But we should always be thinking about the relationships with our teams, having trust and strong positive relationships in place, and we should be thinking about those relationships in two terms. One in which allows us to have that strength of trust from our people, but on the other hand, it also allows us to be able to put in place the right challenge and the right leadership development and behaviors for ourselves. So that relationships and trust allow us to do that. And very often managers who haven't had training get that bit wrong. They think the relationship is all about making sure the team are okay. Actually, it's also about making sure you have authority and credibility. That's why we build those relationships. And then we should always have a plan, right? We should always have a plan for our business or our department or our team, and be able to articulate that plan clearly to people so they understand what we're trying to achieve. And that is, progress. It's something different from today. In a year or 2 years' time, we want to be in a position that's different from today. And how do we articulate that clearly? And we should have a plan to do that. And then the first step of the coaching model, the coach model, and this is where we'll focus today, is what we call contracting. And I'll talk a bit more about contracting shortly, but contracting allows us to gain agreement around standards, behaviors, and values. And that's really important, because if we miss that first step, then we'll find that people's behaviors will drift off track, and we'll see inappropriateness, we'll see things happening that we don't agree with within the culture, and it becomes very difficult to address it unless we've had these contracting conversations. We'll talk about how to do that. Once we've contracted, then we should be helping people to get really clear on objectives and goals. We'll cover that in a workshop in a couple of weeks. But how do we get clarity over what does high performance look like? What are the key activities? What does progress look like for each person in our team? And spending time with them so that they can articulate it, understand it, and then deliver it. Because if they can't conceptualize what does high performance look like for me in my role, they can't deliver it, right? So it's a really important distinction for us. So clear objectives and goals, then action and observation. This is our ability as leaders to let our teams do great work and be the observer, because that way we can give them praise when they're really performing well. We can correct course when they're perhaps off track, and we can then talk to them about perhaps some of those areas where they need to improve and develop. And that we can do that only through good observation. And after that observation, we get this opportunity to coach for change. And coaching, that's where it fits. It's a slice in the model that allows us to start coaching people, but it has to be in context of a wider leadership framework. And then the final step for us is the H is heroes in the making. It's development planning, succession planning, inspiring people, helping them to think bigger, think longer term, not just day to day. Where do they want to be 12, 24, 36 months, 5 years out? And how can we as a leader encourage and coach them to reach those ambitions and goals? They have to be realistic, of course, for them and business, but having those conversations really inspires people to be part of your organization. So that's the model, and it was a really effective way to think about how we engage with people and lead teams. And it's all laid out. If you haven't read the book Coaching Leaders, that's the book I wrote on this model. It's a really effective model, really good book, really easy to read and really easy to apply. So we're going to talk about contracting and agreement. So what is contracting? So I first learned about contracting when I retrained as an executive coach in 2017. So it's about 7 years ago. And what I recognized when I learned about contracting was that I had been doing it sporadically throughout my leadership career, but not with any level of intent, and certainly not consistently. And as soon as I learned the concept, in the concept of contracting within the context of executive coaching, I recognized the value. So let's talk about what contracting is. So contract is where we have a strategic conversation with a member of our team, and not just individual members of our team, every member of our team, okay? And we start to set expectations around behaviors. We agree the standards that we'll meet with that team, or with that team member, with that person. And we're clear about what that means for their performance and future performance, what we expect, what we would like to see from them. And it's about also as leaders being able to make a commitment to your teams to do a number of things. One of those things is to address issues as you see them coming. So if there are issues with performance, or if there are issues in the business that you think that person needs to be made aware of, then agreeing in advance that you will handle those issues with that person is a really useful way to start to get their engagement and their enrollment in the principle of meeting standards, values, and the right behaviors. And then what we're doing with contracting is creating an opportunity for us as leaders to handle difficulties in the future with our teams. And that's really, it's like opening the door to having difficult conversations in future. And that's really useful as part of the contracting conversation process. And what we do by contracting is by having a strategic conversation, by saying to people, right, this is how we'll operate going forward. I need your buy-in to this, and then asking them, what does that mean for you, right? So we're kind of contracting and coaching, and making sure that they are on board and fully engaged and agreed with the contract that you've discussed together. Okay, and once we've done that, we create this anchor point. So it's an anchor point for relationships from which we can return to time and time again for performance-related conversations. So as we start to see people drift, whether that's behavior drift, performance drift, or attitudinal drift, instead of thinking, I don't like that, or I'm not sure about that, or I can't understand why that person's doing that, instead of it just being something we ruminate over ourselves, we actually address it because we've had a contracting conversation that opens the door to address it. Okay, so that's the difference. That's what we're doing here. And in terms of how you do it, so that's what it is and why it's important. In terms of how you do it, here's an example of, so it is that client that I spoke to you about earlier. These were the notes that she took into her contracting conversations with her team. So first thing, she had an issue with responsibility, and she wanted to switch the responsibility from her always having to follow up with everybody and feel like she's constantly directing and dictating to them. She didn't want to do that. She felt that was the only way to lead them. Instead, to switch and start to talk about using coaching as a leadership style. So she had these conversations, I'd like to start to switch responsibility from me always following up with you to actually having coaching conversations where you're updating me on your progress. Right. And it sounds like a subtle shift, but it's a big shift actually in terms of leadership style. So that was the first thing. Second thing was then for her to start to talk to her teams about being more honest, like being more transparent, radically transparent. And for her, that was two-way. So she wanted to start this honesty with her teams, be more honest when she was frustrated or when things weren't going how they'd expected. She wanted to be open with them and honest, and she wanted them to be receptive, and she wanted that to be two-way, so that she would be open and receptive to them being honest with her. Okay. But doing it in a way that was as positive as possible. So seeing positive behaviors in the workplace, seeing positive attitudes towards each other in the team, towards customers, towards everybody that they're working with, all the stakeholders in the business, being positive about that, right? So having this conversation about, I'd like us to work in a more positive, dynamic culture. And interestingly, even the most negative people in her team responded by saying, that's what I want too. So it's interesting because sometimes people get stuck and caught in this trap of behavior that they don't know how to get out of, and only the leader can break the cycle, right? Then she talked about being supportive. So being supportive of each other, the entire team, including, her. So she's a part of the team. Yes, she's the leader, the manager of the team, manager of the business. But actually, if she's, and this was the conversation she had, if I'm supportive of you, and I will be, I expect you to be supportive of me. And it's interesting because if you don't have those conversations, people don't always join up the dots. There's just this expectation that my manager or my leader is always going to support me. They don't always think I should be supportive of them. So sometimes we have to spell these things out. She also talks about the importance of challenge. So to challenge each other's ideas, to challenge each other's thinking, to challenge each other when perhaps we don't agree, but to do it in a positive way. Okay, so challenge and be challenged, doing it in a positive manner. And sometimes that won't always happen. People will forget, but to be able to bring them back to remember, we said we want to do this in a way that's positive, and that's why contracting is so important. And then the other element that was really important for this client was to have difficult conversations and move forward positively. So sometimes you will, very often as leaders, there are times we'll have to have difficult conversations. And what we don't want, and it's really interesting, I've got a client I'm working with at the moment, and they've gone into a business that's well established. And anytime they try and have a difficult conversation, people stop talking to them. They're sulking, and they literally clam up. And it's really interesting. So now that person hasn't contracted with everybody. So they haven't had these conversations. And what they're seeing is almost childlike behavior in the workplace. It's really strange, but it happens. This is we're dealing with people, with human beings, and people behave in ways that are different from us. Sometimes we don't always understand it, but contracting allows us to start to reset with our teams and with people. So having difficult conversations, move forward positively. And then the final thing that she wanted to include in this contracting conversation was welcoming feedback, seeing feedback for her and her teams as an opportunity for growth. So we don't see feedback negatively. We see it as an opportunity to learn and grow from that position. And really interesting, when you're in a culture where people have seen any feedback as negative, it takes a little bit of reconditioning for people to understand this principle. So she had to go over this a number of times with people, all of these coaching principles, all of the contracting principles, I should say, a number of times with her team. So these are some examples. I will share these slides with you today so that you've got them as a reference. So that's contracting. That's why it's important. That's what it is, and that's how we do it. So sometimes in these sessions we go into breakout rooms. We've got a smaller group today, so I'm not going to open up breakout rooms, but I will just pause the sharing and just open it up. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what we've covered today. You put this into the context of your business or the work that you're doing. I'd love to hear what you're thinking about, and what this means to you and your business. Who'd like to start us off?
Well, I'll go first if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Yeah. The whole journey for sales training around command of the message, challenger selling, command of the message, solution selling, consultative selling, and so on and so forth. And you find that if you're the only one that knows the narrative and the vernacular, then no matter what you say, people just don't understand the words. So you end up with this situation where you've all got to go through the training and the journey together, which is what you're saying, but if you're a leader and you're trying to, I mean, I remember doing a team charter 20 years ago. Getting people around the world to agree to communicate and trust each other and be honest and not hide the banana and all that kind of stuff that everybody does just because they feel a bit more, they've built a bubble around them, they feel a bit more comfortable in that, not being quite so open. So but it just that was my point. The point is that it might take I'm probably playing to your agenda here, but it might take an outside party, a third party, to invigilate and help people through that journey on a regular basis, rather than the leader just coming up with a whatever, this is how I'm going to do things, what do you think, and getting some contract together. And having that being done by a third party might be a bit more effective, or in terms of for expediency.
Yeah, agreed. That's interesting you say that, Chris, because I've run contracting or chartering sessions for multiple clients, and actually this client I'm talking about here, who we did this one-to-one coaching with, it was a big part of helping her to stay accountable to do it, because she met a lot of resistance doing this. You will, when you introduce any change to a business, there's resistance. And it's interesting what you say, because I think very often I think about the different leadership roles I had. I think sometimes, even though you want to do the right thing as a leader, if your team aren't fully bought in, it's such a disruption. It slows things down so much that sometimes it becomes a battle of wills. And I'm sure in a number of businesses that I led, the team were thinking, is he serious about this, or is this going to go away? The classic change curve. First step of the change curve, denial. Right? He's not serious. This isn't sticking around. And very often as leaders, you're bang on. We'll have to, it almost becomes a rhythm. And when people realize, okay, this is serious, this is how we're operating from now on, I'm going to have to change. The classic change curve is, denial. Then there's a bit of frustration, resistance, but people come out the other side. Some people go through it quickly. Some people go through it a bit more slowly. We have to draw people through that change curve so that they understand it is going to be better on the other side, but there's a process that we have to go through. Yeah, thanks, Chris. Great insights. Who else would like to share some feedback with us?
I do.
Hi, Pretty. Good morning.
Hi there. Hi, everybody. So I am sort of agreeing with Chris, because sometimes as a leader, you have so many hats, and you can't be good at everything. And if you find that a third person comes in, or the ideas even of a third person, say, for instance, we have other team members listening to this workshop, then so you're good at executive coaching. Your ideas and how to implement will help the business. So they will follow that and listen to that a lot more. Sometimes, because as a leader, you can fall back a little bit. We do try our best, but you can fall back a little bit. You may not I always say, give me a week and I'll sort everything out, meaning progress.
Yeah.
Whilst in bigger places, 1 week might be too long, or you might need it in 2 or 3 days. Whilst if a third person comes in, or a team, then everybody wants to listen because it's fresh. It's a bit like fresh input.
Yeah.
And people will listen to that. I mean, I feel it can only go so far, and then you need somebody from outside to come and see things.
Mm.
And the progress you make with that is a lot more. People start to get, really positive and happy because
Yeah.
something different is happening.
Yeah,
But also they
it's
are doing
interesting.
something different. Yes.
It's an interesting point, Pretty. You're right. Sometimes there'll be things, I'll work with clients and we'll go through a program, with their business team, and it makes a change. And the manager will say to me, I've been saying everything you've been saying for years and no one listened to me. And all of a sudden you come in and they listen. There's something about an external voice that seems to, I don't know, shake things up or give people perhaps that external validation that they were looking for. I don't know, but it's an interesting point. Sometimes you do need to, Chris made it as well. Sometimes you need an external person to come in to give you either that support or give your team that change in thinking that perhaps they can't get from internally within the business.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes. So I found that that really did make many years ago. I was with a dental coach. I did one of his first programs, and he had it in over, I think it was 12 months, and it was very new.
Mm.
And we did it locally, but it really made it because you met other people, other
Yeah.
business leaders, and it wasn't a lot, but the progress we made in that time was enormous because you mixed with the other groups, other people, a bit like here.
Mm.
But then also because he was teaching us, which was very new at that time, the team were willing to listen because this is the professional, you're the
Mm.
professional, what you say and you've had things and the progress is like, it's on paper. Like I'm a dentist, I have, the things to show for it, and this
Yeah.
is your job, you have things to show for it. So
Mm.
I felt that was very, very clear, even though I hadn't had the business for long, just 3 years, but it
Mm.
really was very, very obvious to me that what he said they were willing to follow just because that was his job.
Yeah.
That was professional.
People listen to the expert, don't they? Mm.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Pretty. It's good. Claire, how about you? I see, Claire, you've been taking furious notes in the background. I've seen that's good.
Yeah, well, I've got a coaching one-to-one for an hour after this with somebody on my team who doesn't achieve the targets consistently. And it was interesting what you were talking about, people like slipping back and contracting to people, because they tell me whenever they've made a mistake or whenever they've had a week of not doing as many outbound calls as they should. And I don't know if they're trying to head me off at the pass by telling me about that, but and have had some difficult conversations with individuals about KPIs and underperformance recently. And so that's why I'm taking so many notes and I'm highlighting key things. And one of the things I put down was supporting each other, including me. Because well, I've met Pretty before, and so she knows I'm on a really small team of 3 people. So we all have targets and KPIs, and I'm a team leader, not an actual not a senior manager. So I feel like it's been very useful for me today, this, and I've been highlighting things I'm going to include, and putting the onus on the person to say, what will you be doing differently? How will you account for this? Because you don't want to become a micromanager around things. But I'd also like one of the key things that you said was, how does this look for you? So that's something that I shall be including too.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Claire. I'm glad it's useful for you. You're absolutely right. It's really difficult because when your performance is dependent on your team's performance, and someone says to you, "Oh, by the way, I'm not performing," you're absolutely right. They're kind of trying to head you off at the pass. They're trying to make you say, oh, it's okay. But when you've agreed that they will meet those levels of, you know, performance, especially when it's within their parameters, within their control. If it's like outbound calling and they're saying, well, I haven't made the number of outbound calls I could have made today, or whatever it is, if it's something that's an activity within their control, then actually it's only them that can change that. And if your target or your performance is based on their performance, then that's the conversation. Because they're not just letting themselves down, they're letting you down as well. So you're right, being supportive of you as well as them. And I guess, you know this already, Claire, but really getting them to focus, you in those situations, I've found as soon as you accept that, people can go, okay, right, that's okay. Every now and then I'll be able to miss, and it's okay. That's why it's important not to accept it. And then I think the other thing that's really important is getting people to focus on, okay, what went wrong? How are you going to fix it? So how do you stop this happening again next week, the week after, any other time? Because, you know, hindsight's really important, but it's better when it's turned into foresight. What are you going to do with this next week? Forget last week. What are you doing with this next week so we don't have this conversation again? And I think, you know, one of the things that I learned was that when you're in those conversations with people, it's difficult and it's uncomfortable. Okay? It's difficult and it's uncomfortable. And what happens is, because it's difficult and uncomfortable, as managers, we gloss over it. So they say you'll start that meeting, and maybe one of the first things that person will say to you is, yeah, as you saw from my note, Claire, I'm really sorry, I just haven't managed to meet it this week. Expecting you to go, oh, that's okay, because that's what people do, right? That person then feels really comfortable. What the job of leadership is to have some of those uncomfortable conversations and let it be uncomfortable. Because if that person comes in that conversation with you and it's really comfortable, next time they know it's going to be comfortable. I'll use the same approach again. If they come into the conversation with you and, God, Claire was actually quite assertive today. She helped me to see, God, this isn't acceptable. It's a key part of my expectations. I'm not only letting myself down, I'm letting Claire down. All of a sudden, that's the narrative. And next week, that person is then like, I am not going through that conversation again. And that's what we want. We want people thinking, I've let, you know, if they're not performing, they've taken responsibility for that, and then they course correct next week. That's really what we want. So a bit of discomfort is an important part of that conversation, I would say, Claire. Is that useful? Yeah. Good. Thanks, Claire. Joanne in the comments. Joanne, thank you. Sorry, I missed your comment. Joanne's taking the children out this weekend to enjoy some sunshine. That was just going back half an hour. Sorry, Joanne. So Joanne says, sorry, I'm in a shared office today, so difficult to speak. Thanks for sharing that with us, Joanne. So won't be able to speak on mic, but was wondering, how would you recommend approaching this technique of contracting into an already established team? How do you approach it as a positive thing? So that's a great question, Joanne. Thank you for the question. So I have done this a number of times where I've gone into businesses where, you know, there was an established team, I was the new leader coming in, and then having to have these conversations. So what I would say is, I integrated, what I did was integrated into team one-to-ones. And so, like, as a one-to-one review with each team member, have an agenda item that talks about, you know, how you work together. You don't have to call it contracting. If you call it contracting, people might think, blimey, what's happened? Have you gone on a course or something, right? And then they don't take it as seriously. But you might call it, you know, a working collaboration conversation, or you decide what to call it, but call it something that is separate from your normal agenda items. And then what I've done is said, look, what I've observed is that there's an opportunity for us within the business team to actually get some clarity on how we work together. And talking to people about, I like that, Chris, thank you, clarity of purpose. Yeah, clarity of purpose. That's a nice way to position it. Some clarity of purpose in the working, in our team or in our working environment. And then talking about, some of the things that I would like to see, and going into the contracting conversation and pulling up, if it was those notes, then I'd say, one of the things I'd like to do, and a lot of, and the other thing to do is, a bit of peer collaboration. And a lot of the team I've spoken to are also on board with this. So we really want to rally the troops on this. Want everyone to think, okay, this is a good idea. We all want to be on board with it. And then talk about, the coaching leadership style, if that's what you want, the a commitment to performance and taking greater responsibility, being positive and having positive attitudes and creating an environment where everyone feels more motivated and positive. And a couple of weeks ago, we ran a session on mindset. And you may have heard this quote. There's a guy called Sean Aker who wrote the book, The Happiness Experiment. And he talks about a lot of research being done on the difference in productivity depending on your mindset. And if you have a positive attitude, people with a positive attitude are 31% more productive than those people who have a negative attitude. So that's a big swing, right? If you have people in your teams that are negative, their productivity levels will be lower. And you already will have seen this, right? You already will have seen it. So actually having those conversations with people and saying it's important because we want to be productive, we want to be effective, we want people to enjoy their work, we want to create an environment that people enjoy. So you're always focusing on, what is the positive improvement? So your question, Joanne, how do you do it as a positive thing? Actually, we want to create a team environment that's really positive for everybody is a really useful way to do it. So Joanne, hope that helps. Just drop me a comment in there if there's anything else that you would like us to pick up. It's great. Thank you. Thanks, Joanne. Excellent. I'm glad that's useful. Really good conversation this morning, everybody. Thanks for sharing your feedback and your ideas. So if you've got one key takeaway from today, what's your one key takeaway?
So, sorry, can I go first?
Please do, Pretty. Yeah.
I like this concept. I've been following your workshops for a little while now and trying to implement it at work as well, which is, by the way, helping.
Good.
The team are happy. What I find with this, one of the slides that really helped everybody and myself first was the one that if you don't get growth, or what does it cost you not to follow or not reach deadlines or not to achieve something. And that's quite an eye-opener, because even the nurse said it's much harder, much more pressure on us from January on to finish deadlines from January to March, whilst if we work consistently and a bit harder, then with the Christmas break, we really
enjoy yourself. Yeah.
And also because I have like little goals, and so if we do this much, we get to celebrate, and they can choose, and they put little paper things like what they would like, even if it's like ice cream for everybody on a Thursday, because we've done so much. It's silly little things, but everybody feels excited because they say, oh, I want to have a cornetto, or we'll get Ben and Jerry's, or we'll go to Baskin and Robbins. And so we all go in the car to Baskin and Robbins. But attaching that and the fact that they will lose out on something has made a good I feel like I've made a point and achieving progress. So the growth area is there. So that's my take on this.
Yes, so linking this to reward or incentive so that people feel really committed to achieve the goal because they see that there's something in it for them as well. And what day did you say? Thursdays for ice cream, Pretty?
Yes.
I'll come down and see you on a Thursday if that's all right.
Okay, sure, of course, no problem.
I love that. Thanks, Pretty. Excellent, excellent. What one key takeaway? What else have other people got? You put it in the chat if you'd rather put it in the chat. The reason I'm asking is because very often with sessions like this, the thing that makes the difference is the one thing you do as a result. That's the thing that really does make the difference.
The thing that you said to me for me was, if you put up with it, you stuck with it.
Yeah. 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 What you put up with, you end up with, or you're stuck with. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Sometimes we do have to tolerate that. I'm sorry, examine that, not tolerate that. Examine what you tolerate, not tolerate it. And that was a Freudian slip, right? But it's what we do. We tolerate stuff, don't we? We tolerate things that we shouldn't be tolerating. And as leaders, we do have to examine that, because it's only us that can change it. No one's going to do it for us.
Both ways. No, I think you got to accept that we're all human, and even your team members. If you lack clarity of purpose as a leader, or are unable to communicate effectively, or over communicate, or whatever the whole the scenario might turn out to be, you've got to accept that you're going to get not necessarily the outcome you had imagined. And it's a constant journey. So you get the motivation commitment curve, and it's the commitment that you have to. We're talking about maintaining and nurturing, even though there's going to be some pretty dark moments, we know. So the person that does say, oh, "Hey, I'm going to miss my target this week," they're not saying it because they're malicious, and they're saying it because they're stressed. So it's a bit like driving a car up behind somebody on a bike, getting really close. That person on the bike is going to be very stressed. They can't see you. They only have certain parts of their senses are working for them, and they are frightened. And then of course, if you think about the impact you're having on people, that's also part of the picture as well. And it's not easy. There's no doubt.
It's the blend of art and science. I agree. And sometimes you do have people that have actually absolutely done everything they can, and they won't hit, right? And in those situations, you absolutely have to understand. But if somebody's saying, it's not about the target, it's I had a number of activities I was going to do this week and I didn't get to them. The question, that for me is a different conversation. So it's all contextual, but it's making sure that there's you have to be reasonable, absolutely. But it's also making sure that you're able to get that commitment from people when they're capable of doing things. If someone's capable of doing something and they haven't done it, it's a different conversation, isn't it? But good, good measured response there, Chris. Thank you. Okay, let's finish a couple of things off. So let me tell you, my client was called Tracy. I don't think I mentioned her name. So what about Tracy? So Tracy did some one-to-one coaching with me and went through my academy. Here's her testimonial. So helped her to step into a leadership role. That was one of the things that she felt that she was struggling with, recognizing herself as a leader, because she'd never had that development. And here we go. So the surprising thing is that my team are now more engaged in behaving in a way that's supportive of me and each other. I have needed to be more confident and assertive, but they've responded really well to that. Almost like a one-to-one conversation said to me, it's almost like someone said to her, it's what we've been waiting for, which is really interesting. Many have spoken to me privately to say how much more they enjoy being part of our team now. Everyone is clear about what's acceptable and what isn't, and I'm proactive in dealing with anything that comes up. And she, felt like she was being on the kind of almost reactive. She's now proactive. So really good. Oh, thanks, Joanne. Joanne says, I think you're sharing them on screen. Hold on, let's have a look. Am I? I think I probably must be. Sorry. Thank you, Joanne. I appreciate that course correction. So this was Tracy. This was her quote. So surprising thing is that my team are now more engaged. I won't go through it again. I just explained it, but it really does. You know this as well. I know this from my own experience. Working on these things, whether you do it on your own, whether you do it with a coach, whether you do it as a program, really does make a difference. And it's interesting. The final thing I will say on this, my last corporate job, I worked for a managing director, and everyone in the business called him the Hammer. Right, that was his nickname, was the Hammer, and it made me. And this quote, I found this quote, and it made me laugh because it reminds me of him. He had one style, and that was as aggressive as possible. Right, he was aggressive with everybody, directive, aggressive, angry. He would swear, he would shout, and most of the time he got his own way. So he was constantly getting this positive reinforcement from behaving like a hammer, right? And everyone called him the Hammer, not to his face, right, but behind his back. And it reminds me of this quote, right? And if you think about leadership, right, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So leadership development is really important. Starting to develop different styles, different approaches, ways of working, really important for us as leaders. And which leads me on to, when I think about, some of you will have heard this before, when I think about leadership success, we need 5 things. We need to be able to have confidential conversations. We need a community of people who get us. We need to be able to collaborate so we can learn and share best practice. We need to have our ideas challenged, because sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And then we have to make a commitment, have someone that helps us make a commitment to act and change, because inertia is incredibly powerful for us and our team. So we have to get that commitment to make a difference. And if you get these 5 elements, I don't think there's anything missing. You get these 5 things in place, it really does make a difference to how you go about developing your leadership. Final thing then. So if anybody would like a one-to-one conversation, I think some of you have done this with me in the past. If you'd like a conversation, then there's a link. Just put it in the chat. There's a link to my diary. And yeah, feel free to book a 45-minute strategy session or discovery session. It's an opportunity just to talk through perhaps your business, through what you're working on. If there's any of the ideas today that you think, actually I'd like to explore that a bit further, then happy to discuss that. Really kind of, it's all about where you are, where are you now, where would you like to be, what development will get you there, and what actions do you need to take. It sounds simple, right? But when someone else is asking you those questions, it's surprising how it changes the way that you think. And sometimes your answers are the answers that you kind of say to yourself, and it's not until someone else asks you a question, reflects back what you've said, that you go, actually, I'm not sure that's quite what I need. So it's always an interesting conversation. Anyway, that is us for today. Any final questions from anybody before we wrap up and close the session? I'm going to give you 5 minutes before your 10 o'clock meetings. Any final comments from anybody before we wrap up? Any final questions? Any final comments?
Sorry, can I ask?
Pretty, yeah.
With these new, they're not quite terms and conditions, but these new way, would you put it on paper as part of an appraisal, or just a coaching session? Or obviously we don't use email as much, in our business, but
Yeah.
how would you do that? Can
Good
I ask,
question.
just so that it's not heavy,
Yeah.
but it's just a guide for them,
Yeah.
and for us?
Good question, Pretty. So I have documented it in the past. In a one-to-one context, I've asked people to send me a note with their thoughts on what they would like as part of that agreement between us.
Okay.
And then, they might send me 5 points, and then they'll send that to me, and I would have printed that off and kept that as part of their appraisal documents. So that then it becomes, and it can be also, the other thing that's really useful if you're having regular one-to-ones with your teams, to be able to then just say, thanks for sending me that. If you're okay, we'll just check in on that every month when we have our one-to-one. Would that be okay? And everybody says yes. And so at the start of every one-to-one, you can just go, great, what we're covering our normal one-to-ones. Let's just check back in on what we agreed, our working, our standards, or whatever you call it, whatever you want to call it. I did call it our one-to-one contract. And you just go through it. So this, and how do you think you're getting on? Get them to tell you. And it's a really effective way of getting them to continually self-course correct. So you're reminding them and then coaching them, reminding them and coaching them. And that can be really effective.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Thank
Pleasure,
you very
Pretty.
much. Yeah.
Pleasure. Thanks for the
Very
question.
good session. Thank you very much.
Good, good. Thanks, Pretty. So thank you, everybody. Well, listen, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, whatever you're doing. Chris, I hope your preparations for holiday go really well. Good luck on the drive down. I hope the bikes stay on the rack. You're on mute, Chris. Sorry.
Sorry, they're going in the back. Yeah.
Are they going in the back? Oh, well, there's no
Well-
problem then. Is it just about fitting them?
Yes, it is exactly. Yeah.
Well, you might have to, not take something else. There's a prioritization effort there, isn't there?
There might be a pile of bits that goes in rather than what's recognizable as a bike.
Pop the wheels off. That always works. Pop the wheels off. Well, have a great holiday anyway, Chris. Lovely to see you all. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you at the next session.
Thanks all.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care. See you. Bye.